Before I introduce Dr. Raina Stoicheva, I do want to thank some members of our staff who've been on hand to make things go smoothly today. They include Daniel Van Sant, Mindy Jones, Catherine Kuckelman, Morgan Ryan, and Ava Basso. So thank you to all of you for your support of today's event. Dr. Raina Stoicheva is our Director of Retirement Security Policy. She joined the Harkin Institute in 2021 and oversees the Institute's retirement security policy work. She is primarily responsible for research on public and private retirement programs, retirement savings access and adequacy, financial literacy, and pension wealth equality, and she is largely responsible for the program that we have before us this afternoon, which I am certain you will find rewarding and informative and maybe a little entertaining along the way. Raina?
Thank you, Craig. And I think quite a few of you know that Monday was the first official day for Craig to start with us. So he's had quite, the starting week with a full-on event. And we're really excited to have you at the Harkin Institute. Again, I would like to extend our welcome to the event today. I half-jokingly said that now I have to establish regular roundtables as they have come from people who are interested in speaking at the Harkin Institute, and I think we are going to look at this opportunity in the future. So for this event, we are really excited to host both national and international experts on retirement policy, and we hope that this event is only the first event in a series of events that we can continue to have those conversations. This event, my thank you, in addition to our wonderful staff who has supported the production of this event. The event would not have been possible without our generous sponsors for today, including Tor Financial Consulting and T. Rowe Price, and then Larry and Kathy Zimpelman, who have been wonderful supporters of both the Harkin Institute and Drake University. I also would like to thank Studio Iowa, who are doing the video streaming for us, and then our CART and ASL interpreters. Thank you. Without further ado, I would like to very briefly introduce the speakers for the first panel. Panel one is focusing on US and global trends in accumulation and policy priorities to support retirement security. The moderator for this panel is Professor Thomas Ruth, an Associate Dean at the Zimpelman College of Business. Tom has been teaching finance in the Zimpelman College of Business at Drake University since 1999. He has received the Graduate Teaching Award and the College of Business Research Award. He has published extensively in academic journals. Joining us in person also is Michael Davis, who is head of global retirement strategy at T. Rowe Price. Michael leads an enterprise retirement strategy, advises on the development of new products, and helps amplify the firm's voice in retirement security-related public policy initiatives. Also in person today with us is Kelly Han, head of retirement research for Vanguard. Kelly's work focuses on improving people's retirement outcomes through examining savings, investing behavior, and the surrounding retirement ecosystem. She leads a dedicated research team that studies retirement planning, savings, spending, and access, with the goal of providing solutions and education that enhance people's chances of achieving retirement success. And Sri Reddy is the Senior Vice President, Retirement and Income Solutions and Principal Financial Group. She is responsible for the income solutions businesses, which include pension risk transfer, defined benefits, retail annuities, principal bank, and principal trust and custody solutions business. So those three speakers will join us in person in a minute. at the stage. And then we also have two virtual speakers. Michael Krebs is principal at Groom Law Group. He is chair of Groom's Retirement Services Group, and he works with a wide variety of clients on complex retirement and health plan issues. His firsthand experience with the legislative and regulatory process gives him a perspective that is often instrumental in helping clients develop and implement effective compliance and advocacy strategies. Michael is also on the Retirement Security Advisory Committee, who has been incredibly supportive of the work in this policy area. Final speaker for panel one today is Guy Opperman, who is a former Minister of Pensions and Financial Inclusion in the UK between 2017 and 2022. He served 4 prime ministers and was a member of parliament from 2010 to 2024. He's the United Kingdom's longest-serving pensions and financial inclusion minister, and currently works as a consultant and advisor on retirement security policy. Please help me welcome our speakers to panel one today.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to start off today with letting all of our panelists give you a kind of brief view of how they view the retirement systems and what's going on today. And we're going to let Kelly lead that off. Kelly, would you like to?
Oh, that was a fast introduction.
Well, we just got your title and everything.
I know, I just sat down. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much to the Harkin Institute as well as Drake University for hosting this wonderful event. I feel honored and privileged to share this panel with my esteemed industry colleagues. So I wanted, in preparation for this panel, I was asked to opine on the US retirement readiness. In our research that we do at Vanguard every other year, known as the Retirement Outlook, we find that about 4 in 10 Americans are on track to achieving retirement security. Now, that number is when we look at it at the macro level, so it's a 50,000-foot level view. And once we start to zoom in, that's when we see the picture a lot more clearly. We see that there's a whole wide range of outcomes, individual outcomes. There are many people who are ready to retire, and there are also many more who are not ready to retire. And what we find really, really important is that there's one important factor that helps to determine whether one would be ready or not, and that is whether the person has access to an easy way to save towards their retirement, something like within a defined contribution savings scheme through their work. We find that those with 401k savings or other types of DC vehicles, they're twice as more likely to be retirement ready than those that don't have access. So then the solution to raise the national level of retirement readiness, the 4 in 10 number that I just shared with you, it sort of becomes clear. It's really twofold. One is to make the DC more accessible to as many workers as we possibly can, because right now only about 1 in 2 are currently covered and are saving towards their retirement through their workplace in a 401k or something like it. And then the second one is understanding how our DC system is currently working, to double down on the things that are working really well, and to fix the things that can improve. So in my mind, the things that are working really well are all of the automatic features that have been implemented back in 2006, coinciding with Pension Protection Act. We see in our data among our clients, about 6 in 10 employers are automatically enrolling their new hires. And when they do, virtually everybody saves towards their retirement, which is amazing. And over the years, we've seen the default savings rate that's gone up. So about 1 in 3 of our clients are defaulting their new hires at 6% or more. So when we combine that number with strong employer match, an average client on Vanguard 401k platform, they're saving 12%, which is right in line with where Australia is. So that has worked really well. But I want to focus on where we can improve, because there are friction points that many of the workers are encountering, especially as they go through many job changes. Unlike in Australia, where the superannuation fund is owned at the individual level, so porting it over from company to company is a lot easier, but in the US, the 401k accounts are held at the employer level. So as we contemplate moving to a different job, consolidating assets, there are many friction points that workers experience that sometimes deter wealth accumulation. So I want to highlight two things that I think can be problematic that I want all of us collectively to think about how we can solve this. One is that as people go through job changes, their savings rate can go down pretty substantially. Why do people change their jobs? One of the important motivating factors is that my income goes up. And that's precisely what we see in our data among our clients. The average increase in their wage can be 10%, which is pretty substantial when you think about it, right? But at the same time, their savings rate tends to go down by 1 percentage point. And when you think about the long-term compounding that could happen over 30 or 40 years, that 1% reduction can have a really meaningful impact. So as we think about the solutions, I think there are many. Well, before I get to that, so why does the slowdown in savings happen when people change their jobs? Well, there are two main reasons. One is that sometimes the companies don't automatically enroll their new hires, in which case, then it's up to the new hire to decide whether to save and how much to save. And if it's up to the individuals, we find that 1 in 4 either forget to save or choose not to save. So their savings rate goes to 0. And then second instance of when people experience reduction in savings can be even when the employers are automatically enrolling. The plan features may not line up from company to company, and that causes friction. So what do I mean by that? So imagine the most common 401k plan feature, company that defaults their workers at 3% and automatically increases that number by 1% per year. And having spent 5 years, that person may be saving 8%. But when they move to the new job and they're defaulted at 3%, then there's a reduction of 5% that's happening for the employee as they go through many job changes, up to maybe 9 or 10 throughout their entire career. And when we quantify the impact on the wealth accumulation, for a typical worker earning $60,000, this can result in the foregone wealth of $300,000, which may be enough to fund additional 6 years of retirement spending. So this is a huge problem that we want to fix. So part of the solution can be the auto portability. I know Michael Krepp will talk about auto portability, so I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but we could imagine a world where auto portability isn't just for the balances that are being ported over from company to company, but rather we could also include demographics, such as how much one was saving before, and then going one step further to use that information to default each individual person at the prior savings rate as opposed to perhaps the 3% that is uniformly applied to all new hires. So that's one challenge that I see in terms of the frictions that many people are encountering. And then the second one is around wealth leakage. We see in our data that as people go through their jobs, when emergencies occur and when there's not enough cash on hand, people are taking early redemption from their retirement wealth through hardship withdrawal or loans. And at the end of a job, when the entire account balance may be available to them, 1 in 3 workers, they end up taking all of that money out as a cash out, which is really problematic, right? We don't want this behavior of wealth accumulation and that is all taken out every time somebody is changing their jobs. So how can we solve this? Well, part of the solution has to be not just focusing on retirement planning, retirement saving and investing. it really has to be part of building financial resiliency through better financial wellness. How do we get people to have emergency savings and help them pay down debt so that they don't accumulate debt, and when the retirement wealth is available to them as they're leaving the company, they end up taking it all out to pay down their debt. So we want to build the retirement system that we have right now to be more resilient for all of the workers that are going through various job changes that we probably all have gone through. So those are some of the examples that I wanted to share with you to start the panel on where we think some of the inefficiencies lie. But in conclusion, though, I think we've done a really, really remarkable job on behalf of many Americans. We now have more than $12 trillion in DC assets, but we have a lot more that we can do to make it a lot easier and more seamless as people move through various job changes. So look forward to the rest of the panel discussion.
Thank you, Kelly. It's fabulous. This is why I did the quick introduction. They have all the great knowledge. So, for our second panelist to give perspectives, we're going to jump to the virtual space. And if we could have Michael Krebs chime in to give us his thoughts to start off the discussion today.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Can everyone hear me okay? We'll check
Yes,
there.
we're doing well.
Okay, great. Well, I had a little, I'm back in the office. I will tell you that we were evacuated temporarily. It could happen again. So we'll try and get through my remarks quickly so that just in case. But I appreciate you all having me today. Thanks a million to Raina and the whole Harkin Institute for all the work they're doing. Big shout out to them. The Institute is doing a ton of great work on a lot of fronts, including retirement. And I am personally very excited about the direction the Institute's headed and the work they're producing. So hopefully, if you haven't already checked out what they're doing on other fronts, you should do that as well. And I think you'll find that there's a lot of good thought leadership coming out of the Institute. So I'm going to talk a little bit about auto portability, and I appreciate the generous tee up there on these remarks. And then I'm going to talk about how maybe auto portability and some of these portability efforts can dovetail with larger federal policy initiatives to encourage savings and build wealth, intergenerational wealth, I think is the goal. So we talked a little bit, we just heard a little bit about some of the challenges in the retirement system. And the retirement system is working for a lot of folks, but it's certainly not perfect. I think I think most people will acknowledge that there's some challenges with coverage, that not everyone has access to a retirement plan at the workplace. And if they don't have access to a retirement plan at the workplace, they're very unlikely to save. That's one important challenge. And the states and others are doing lots to tackle that. But on the other side of the coin, what we do see is a fair amount of leakage from the system, that it is contributing to a lack of retirement security for a lot of people. And I'll just define leakage my own way. It's money that was contributed to the system and then is taken out in advance of retirement. It usually occurs, there's a lot of barriers to leakage in the system. There are a lot of rules and regulations that prohibit people from just kind of willy-nilly taking money out of their retirement plan. And there are penalties associated with withdrawals before retirement age in many circumstances. But the biggest friction point that results in leakage is really as people change jobs. Folks kind of bounce around a lot. I don't think that's particularly new. I think at least my view of the data is that people have long had many different jobs over the course of their working lives, and that young people in particular bounce around a lot more. I think there's kind of a myth of an old career where you worked 35 years for XYZ company and you got the gold watch and you were out the door with a pension. And I think for most Americans that reality probably didn't exist, or at least a large percentage of Americans. People have always kind of bounced around. That's just how it is. But what happens as people move is that they accumulate a little bit of savings. They're in a job for, I don't know, a year, they contribute, they get a couple $1,000s of savings if they're lucky, and then they change employers. And that money stays behind unless the person takes affirmative steps to move it to their new employer's plan. And not all plans take rollovers. Uh, so we have as a practical matter, what happens is employers end up keeping in their plans a fair amount of money from employees that are long since gone and terminated and moved on. And so in the early 2000s or maybe late 90s, the Congress engaged in some discussions with the employer groups, and there was a concern that there were too many of these little tiny small accounts in 401k plans, and that the costs were high, that the employer was still paying expenses for these little tiny accounts, or the accounts were getting charged fees, and people weren't coming back and getting their savings. And so Congress passed a law that basically said what the employer can do to eliminate the cost and complexity is they can distribute money from the plan. If it's under $1,000, you can just send the individual, a check. And if it's under, at that time, $5,000, now $7,000, between 1 and 7, you can open an IRA for the person and distribute the money and place it into the IRA, getting the money out of the plans, but still preserving the savings in that case. That system has been around now for a couple of decades, and what we've learned is that a large percentage of those accounts that get distributed leak out of the system. The money just leaks. So the under $1,000 accounts contribute to billions of dollars a year, leaking out as people change jobs. They get a check from their employer for $800 or something, and then they cash it. They pay the taxes and the penalties on that, and they use it to pay bills. Or if it's between 1,000 and now 7,000, the money gets contributed to an IRA on their behalf, and they may or may not actually know that's there. They get notices and things, but in many cases they lose track of it, or they themselves cash it out, paying again taxes and penalties. And what this has resulted in is somewhere between 20 and $100 billion a year of assets leaving the retirement system. Doesn't mean that's all waste. There are plenty of people who need the money, and there's reasons they take it out. But I think the evidence shows that there's a large portion of that money that just comes out because of friction. That as you change jobs, it's really hard, or at least there's a perception of it being really hard to move your money into your new employer's plan, and it takes a little bit of work, so they just don't do it. So a few years ago, there was an idea put out there that perhaps we should set up the system a little different. Perhaps rather than having the default answer for these small accounts being that the money is distributed from a plan out, perhaps we should set up a system where by default, the money follows you as you change jobs. So as you go from employer A to employer B, your small account, rather than being distributed to an IRA or given to you in cash, could just go to plan B as soon as you're eligible to participate. Now that sounds really easy in concept and in policy. As a practical matter, it is not easy to do. It is actually considerably more difficult than you would expect because there are roughly 660,000 retirement plans in the country. Some of them are big and some of them are small. There are hundreds of different vendors that service those plans. Like, how do you make these plans talk to each other? And how do you get this money to move when we don't have a centralized system for doing that in the country? Other countries have centralized systems that route money to retirement plans. We don't have that. And so there was an effort undertaken to build that infrastructure as a technology solution that would allow these small accounts to automatically follow the worker as they move jobs. Now, this solution was designed solely with these small accounts in mind, but it could be used for larger accounts. And there were a lot of policy and practical reasons for that. But they designed a IT solution that effectively creates a centralized clearinghouse that the major record keepers, major plan vendors, the people who kind of do day-to-day administration of plans, can hook into. And when a worker leaves plan A, the plan will begin a process where a centralized clearinghouse searches all of the plans in the network, and it continues to conduct that search over and over and over until it locates that individual's account in an active plan somewhere else. So let me just give you an example. Joe leaves Joe's shoe shop. He gets sick of working for himself. He leaves. He notifies his plan. He's gone. The plan notifies the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse begins to look for Joe. Eventually, Joe gets a job at Target. Let's say Joe's now working at Target. Eventually, Target's plan registers him as being active and having an active account. And Joe will get a notice that says, if you don't do anything, Joe, we're going to move your small account balance from your Joe Shoe Shop plan into your Target plan account. We know it's active. We know where you are. We're just going to do that for you. You can opt out if you choose, but if you do nothing, the money's just following you to your new employer. This system went live recently, last year. It takes a while to build out for a variety of regulatory reasons. The record keepers and other vendors have to go and get consent from all the employers participating. And as you can imagine, getting consents from 600,000 plus plans is a huge undertaking, but they're growing every day. I think they're up to 20 or 30,000 plans in the first year, and that compounds, covering tens of over, I think 10 or 15 million people at this point. That will grow over time as this implementation continues. But what we're already seeing is that it's helping to preserve savings for thousands and thousands of people, because as people change jobs now, they will have this option or this added benefit of the money just automatically following them, and they're less likely to cash out when that happens. Now, I want to connect this auto portability concept to a couple of the other things that are floating around out there on the policy side. We've put in place two big policies over the past 3 or 4 years that are designed to really help incentivize savings and grow people's accounts, and particularly younger, lower income people. The first policy was the creation of what's referred to as the Savers Match. The Savers Match is an evolution of something called the Savers Credit, which had existed for a couple of decades. The Savers Credit was a non-refundable tax credit that essentially matched your contribution to a retirement plan up to some certain contribution limits and income limits. So for lower income folks, you could get a non-refundable tax credit if you made a contribution to a retirement plan in some way. That sounds really great. The challenge and what made it ineffective is that there just aren't that many lower income people who have federal income tax liability. And so giving them a non-refundable credit, it's, thank you, but I don't get any benefit from this. I have no taxes to offset. And so it was largely ineffective. There was a small band of people that it worked for, and it was helpful, but for the general populace, it wasn't that effective. And so in 2022, Congress redid the rules, and they converted it into what's now referred to as a Savers Match. And it's a federal matching contribution that operates like a tax credit, except that it's refundable. And so lower income folks who don't have any income tax liability can still take advantage of it. Now, okay, that's all well and good, but how does that work? Are there any restrictions? And there's many restrictions. Income limits, this is designed for lower and moderate income families, so there's some income limitations. But the key restriction I want to highlight is that the match doesn't go to people individually. You can't claim this and then receive a check from the government. Rather, it has to be deposited directly into a retirement plan. And so much like auto portability, we have the same challenge here with cash out leakage. We have, again, over 600,000 retirement plans. How does the government know where they are? And even if the government can identify all 600 plus thousand plans, how does the government get a check from the federal treasury into a retirement plan? There's retirement plans, have trustees, and the government would have to identify the trust accounts and make their way, have the money go in. So that has been a challenge. The Savers Match has a couple more years before it's implemented, and those checks have to start flowing from the federal government. But the policy solution is largely similar, at least in my view, that we need to build the roads, the infrastructure to allow this money to flow from the federal government. to these individual accounts. And that infrastructure is going to look a lot like auto portability, a centralized clearinghouse, regardless of where that sits, where money, the federal government can send checks and have them dispersed out to the plans. And there's a similar policy initiative, and this is where I'll kind of wrap it up, that was in the big budget bill that was just passed and signed into law on July 4th of this year. A surprising portion of that bill includes something called a Trump account. Now, leave aside the name. I'm going to call them HR1 accounts for myself. So these HR1 accounts, they are childhood savings accounts that are intended to allow people to save on a semi-tax preferred basis on behalf of children. And then children have access to the money when they turn 18, and it becomes a kind of just like a traditional IRA. The idea is if you start kids saving early, you can help them build wealth early in life so that they develop a culture of saving and a habit of saving, but also have some resources in case of an emergency. There's a lot of analogous policies. You probably maybe heard of baby bonds or early childhood savings accounts. They're all kind of the same idea. Give kids money in an account, let it grow, and then they'll have resources available to deal with life. The interesting part about the Trump account proposal, which is now law, is it came along with a multi-year pilot project where kids born from 2025 to 2028 will get a Trump account automatically established for them, presumably automatically, but will get a contribution from the government of $1,000. So I just want to, it took me personally a little bit to wrap my mind around what was happening here, but the federal government is contributing $1,000 to an account for every child born in America for a 4-year period. That's kind of a interesting experiment we've got. We'll see how it goes. But again, this is another policy initiative where we have the same challenge, right? We have a federal government that needs to be able to deposit federal money into an account that they haven't identified or found. And it's going to likely require a kind of a clearinghouse type solution, whether that's a federal one or a private one. It's going to require some intermediary to help distribute the money to these accounts. So just kind of wrap this all up. I think the kind of overarching theme I'm getting at here, and I guess the thing I'd like folks to take away is that we've got a disaggregated system, and that disaggregation, the fact that we have so many retirement plans, brings a lot of complexity and challenge. There's some real benefits to it, but there's some complexities, and one of the biggest ones is that we just don't have, until recently, we haven't had the tools to be able to easily move money either from the federal government into plans or between plans and shift money around. And that was resulting in a lot of people losing out on the opportunity to save and it really hurting retirement security. Now, I think we're on a path towards developing and building those roads that allowed money to flow more smoothly through the system. And that will benefit some of these programs that have been designed to, in particular, to help lower and moderate income people. And thanks, and I'm happy to respond to questions later.
Thank you, Michael. We're going to stay in the virtual space as we move to our third panelist. Go a little bit more international here. I believe joining us from Saudi Arabia is Guy Opperman. Guy, if you'd like to jump in.
Thank you so much. So I hope you all can hear me nicely. It is 41 degrees in the desert in Saudi Arabia. I have specially put on a tie, parked my camel, and I'm delighted to be joining you in circumstances where I am working in the Middle East, advising on retirement policies. I used to be a politician and the Minister for Pensions, and I'm now going around the world assisting various countries. I've just got back from South Africa. I head off to Malaysia next month to assist them on retirement policies on a long term. So I think what I'd like to try and start with is a thank you, which is an honored thank you to the Harkin Institute and to everybody who has organized this for having me. It is an amazing honor, and please God that the Wi-Fi survives 7,300 miles to get to you. The second is that I've held a number of jobs in government. I was in Treasury, I was the employment minister, I was a part of the Homeland Security and Immigration team, but the job I mostly did was as the Minister for Pensions and the first ever Minister for Financial Inclusion in the UK government. And I think what I'd like to do is give you some lessons from the UK, a quick overview of the international scene, and then try and give you some advice potentially for the students in the room and also the learning colleagues there. So the UK scene is that since 2012, we have introduced effectively mandated default DC, auto-enrolled DC, which I was privileged enough to take to 8% in 2017-18 as the minister. Now, we had had years and years of declining defined benefit. We had had years and years of a stagnating state pension. And we then managed to secure cross-party agreement to ensure that we had a genuine defined contribution system. And the lessons I would point to are in the statistics. It's really simple. Prior to 2012, most young people and women, certainly barely 30% of young people and women had a private pension. There may have been some good schemes and things like that. They never took it up. The long and the short of it is, though, that is now up to 85%. The transformation in 13 years is astonishing. And the degree to which the UK now has a private pension system, saving at 8% on a combined employer-employee basis, is genuinely game-changing. The second is the numbers of private pensioners. You know, we were at approximately 10 million in 2012. We're now at nearly 25 million in 2025. Again, these are transformational figures. They are totally changing the way in which retirement is being judged in the UK. And I think the lessons can be learned elsewhere. If I go to the 54 countries of Africa, for example, there's basically not a single one that has DC. Many have no retirement systems at all, and a large number would have very minor DB. There's a tiny bit of DC, but almost none. You go across the Middle East and Asia, relatively limited DC, some legacy DB. The entire world is going DC. Now, the title of this talk also looks for policy priorities to support retirement security. And I'm hopeful that there are some amazing students in the room who potentially are going to be the next president, bar 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the United States or of their homeland country. So the first rule of becoming president, in my humble opinion, is that you should mandate default DC. The second rule of becoming president is that you should mandate default DC, because Kelly and Michael's talk were both outstanding, but the long and the short of it is if you leave it to the individual, they will never save as well as if the government mandates a default DC. However proactive the economy, the individual, the state drives that individual capability. And it tends to be those who are most struggling who don't save in the circumstances where there is no mandated DC. So that would be my strong indication. The reality of the situation is the US has an amazing system, as rightly identified by colleagues. But I think we could do more. And there is I'll give you one policy priority, because I know we're short on time. And my one policy priority would be, we spend a lot of time on accumulation. That is what most people are focused upon. And we spend relatively little time on decumulation because it tends to get pushed away. But there is a crucial midpoint, and I want to try and identify that for you. So the average life expectancy sees your midpoint as 47. So when you reach the age of 47, you are in a position that you look at your longevity, you look at your job, you look at your health, and most of all, you look at your wealth and your retirement. That is the tipping point age. The statistics are overwhelming on this. So the biggest policy when you are next president, I would suggest you should then follow, is to have a midlife assessment where you have a facts of life chat with each of the individuals and you then explain to them just how much they have got set aside for their retirement, 1 out of 100 will have a sufficiency, but they still have 20 years prior to their retirement to make a difference. So for my part, I have met 36 pensions ministers around the world, from my esteemed colleague in China, who was looking after 1.4 billion Chinese, to Croatia, India, Italy, and many, many places in between. I am honored to be able to speak to you, happy to take questions. And I think for me, what this is about is bringing together people who have great expertise, pooling ideas, and trying to find solutions to some of the great problems that we clearly have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy. Hope you get to cool off a little bit later on there. So, all right, moving back to in-person panels, we're going to next jump to Michael Davis.
Right into it. Yeah, there we go. So I am just beyond honored to be here today and to see all of you. I served in government like Guy. I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Labor Department from 2009 to 2012. During that time, Harkin was chair of Senate HELP, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. My boss at the time was Phyllis Boise. She was the Assistant Secretary. She adored Senator Harkin. On her behalf, I want to say thank you. On her behalf, I want to say it's an honor to be here. We celebrate the work he did both in retirement and with respect to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's just an indescribable honor to be here today. Now, I understand that this is a very intelligent and youthful audience. And as I look out, I see people maybe average age, I'd say 30 to 35. Perhaps maybe a few people are 35 at heart. And so what we're going to do is a bit of a call and respond. I grew up in the church. My father pastored the church for over 40 years. So there will be some audience participation, if you don't mind. And I understand that you're highly intelligent. Rainey has assured us of that you're some of the smartest Americans in the country. So we're going to have a little fun in the next few minutes. But I was asked to talk a bit about macro themes and macro trends that we're seeing globally around sort of aging and what the implications of that are legislatively, both in the US and what we're seeing overseas. Guy said it, and I think he's absolutely right, that defined contribution is coming to a country near you. It has to, because the math dictates that it has to. The role I'm in as head of global retirement strategy at T. Rowe Price, we stood up about a year and a half ago, largely because of the global demographic trends that we saw. The world is aging. Is that a surprise to anybody in here? Good, so that's the first right answer, it's good. And that's a factor of a couple, that's a sort of a result of a couple of different factors. One, people are living longer, right? Longevity rates around the world are just going up. And they're going up for very good reasons. One, healthcare is better. You think about pharmaceuticals and medicines and doctors and what we're able to do with medicines to prolong lives. That's very important. But also more people have access to those things than they did in the past. And that makes a tremendous difference in terms of people's ability to live long lives. So global population, and this is data that we have compiled along with Goldman Sachs. You may have heard that we announced a strategic collaboration with Goldman Sachs in retirement and wealth and other things, and I'm pulling data from both of our firms, our platforms. Global population of those 65 years of age and older is expected to double from 808 million in 2024 to 1.6 billion in, guess which year? How far off do you think that date would be, if you had to guess? Exactly. Somebody's got their AI up and running. 2050. That is only 25 some odd years away. So you think about that. That is a massive change for the world that you have that population double. The implications are massive, right? So that is part of the equation that's driving sort of overall longevity rates. What do you think the other thing would be? What would the other contributing factor be? So you have, exactly right. Fertility rates are going down, and they're going down fairly dramatically around the world. That is particularly the case in a lot of the developed economies around the world. So current global fertility rates have fallen from 3.31 in 1990 to 2.25 now. Many countries around the world have a birth rate that is below the replacement rate. That's the rate at which you could keep your population static without migration. Many countries, certainly many developed countries, are below that rate. So what that means overall is that over time, the world is going to age and our population is going to peak. So according to the 2024 UN population report, world population will grow by 2 billion until 2060, and then peak. What year would you guess it would peak in, if you had to guess? That's very good. You guys see exactly, right? It was absolutely right. So it is expected to peak in 2084. That is down from an estimate of 2100 just a few years ago. So that peak, and so a lot of people call what is happening around the world the silver tsunami. You probably heard that phrase. We are calling it the Jurassic Arc. as people get older, and this is a trend that has massive implications. On top of that, social spending as a percentage of GDP around the world is going up. So all of this really means, and this is again going back to why we set this roll up, governments will not largely be able to afford pay-as-you-go systems. There are fewer people to pay taxes into that system and more people to support. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that math doesn't work. As we say sometimes, the math isn't mathing. Also, defined benefit systems under a tremendous amount of pressure as more people are living longer lives and those obligations become more robust. That's why, and Guy said it, DC is coming to a country near you. It has to be part of the equation. And if you make the assumption that, yeah, personal savings is part of the solution, then you get to what Guy was talking about. How should it be designed? And he said one of the most key anchor points that we talk about when we talk about the design of these systems around the world is having a default system we think is really critical. So we would argue there should be a national default policy. Not every country has one. I will tell you, I was in Japan not long ago talking about this with their labor department. We'll go back and have the conversation. But a national default policy is key. Well, you also have to take a step beyond that and say, well, what do you default them into? And what do you think? This is a good question for you policy wonks in the room. Is there any specific type of product or investment that you think, if you were the president, as Guy talked about, what would you default people into? Exactly. That's good, David. I love it. Would everybody else agree? You say target date funds. And I'll talk about target date funds in a minute in case you don't know what they are. Anybody else? Other suggestions? Yeah? Well, that is one of the most debated topics. I don't know if you have a panel on Social Security. I would tell you I'm a big supporter of it, and I hope that our government will continue to support it because I think it provides terrific protections. I do think that even with Social Security, there's got to be supplements that allow people to have the same standard of living that they had when they worked, which is why you have things like hopefully defined benefit. We're a big fan of that. Certainly Tom Harkin was while he was in Congress. And also these personal savings systems like defined contribution. So just in the interest of time, I will just tell you, so we would argue that a target date or a diversified product should be what you default people into. Why do you say that, right? Because you could default them into cash, right? You could default them into a fixed income. Well, see, I see head shakes on the front row already. And why wouldn't you want to default people into cash? It doesn't grow enough, right? And so the way to think about these defaults is if you default people into cash, and let's say cash is yielding 2%, but what if inflation is 4%? Are you losing money every day? And unfortunately, that is the situation that's happening in all too many countries. Not that they've defaulted people into cash, but they're not diversified. They're in cash because they don't understand what else to be in. That is one of the challenges that actually Japan is navigating right now. A lot of people are in bank deposits. They're in short-term investments. Inflation had not been a problem in that economy until fairly recently. Now it's hovering around 2%, and it's projected to be at 2% for quite some time. So if you're in a sort of bank deposit earning zero, you're losing money every day, right? That's why you don't default people into cash. you default them into something that's diversified, that should have some growth assets, equities, fixed income, maybe not just short-term fixed income, but longer-term fixed income. When David talked about target date funds, they do that. And what target date funds is they change the asset allocation dynamically as people get closer to retirement. So it becomes progressively more conservative. But as we're having these conversations around the world, we're not necessarily saying you have to have a target date, because not every country sort of has that in their thinking, but we would say it's got to be diversified. The other thing we think is really critical is high contribution rates. Some countries have low contribution rates. You have to have a tax system that encourages a robust level of a deferral. Our advice is that 15% is an optimal deferral rate. It doesn't have to be the same for everybody, but at least we like for people to try to get there. Other things that we tend to say is, and Guy said this, it's not just about accumulation, it's also decumulation. So increasingly in terms of plan design, we think some sort of retirement income component is really critical. Also, we think financial education is critical, and flexibility. And so these are the policies that we stand on as we sort of have these conversations in the US and around the world. And we would encourage our own country to take on some of these things, because we don't have full automatic enrollment. And Mike talked about this, you talked about this a little bit, Kelly, just the importance of having these automatic features that automatically enroll an individual without them having to do anything. We know from behavioral science, the more you can sort of encourage and create the choice architecture that leads people down a good path. You give them the option to opt out if it's not working for them, but you try to move them from a government perspective from where they are to a place that we think is going to be really good for them. So we're following these developments around the world. I will say that the US has worked to try to advance these principles over time. We started with a system that's designed to deliver benefits through the employer. I would tell you that conversation is happening in the United States around, should that be the right delivery mechanism? We don't have time to get into it today, but the fact that employers are the delivery mechanism for retirement benefits is, in some respects, an accident of history, largely coming out of World War II, and I see some heads nodding. I think a lot of Americans would say if they had it to do over, they wouldn't design it through the employer. It would come more centrally. Now, Australia is doing that with their superannuation system. We think, and some of the things that Mike Krebs was talking about kind of inch us down this path where it's not just about the employer, you have better portability. Secure 1 and 2 have tried to do some things to get people more access. So Kelly, you talked a bit about this, the fact that not everybody in the United States has access to a retirement plan. We know that's problematic. Our data suggests that about a third of private sector workers lack access. Those who have access, however, tend to do much better, particularly if they're in a system that's got automatic enrollment, but also automatic escalation. Because if you enroll them at 3% and you leave them there, people typically don't move unless you automatically escalate them, right? And we would say an optimal number is to 15%. I will just say on a go-forward basis, there are some pending pieces of legislation that sort of move the United States further down a path where you automatically enroll everybody. So there's the Retirement Savings for Americans Act that would enroll people, full and part-time workers, with a 3% deferral rate as a start. We think that's a step in the right direction. We certainly encourage more of these automatic features, not only in the US, but around the world, because we do find that you have these demographic differences in retirement savings. People of color, blacks, Hispanics, women tend to have lower savings rates, but when you put them in a situation where they have automatic enrollment, automatic escalation, those differences tend to dissipate. So we would encourage those, certainly in the United States, and look forward to being supportive of those principles as we go forward.
Great, thank you, Michael. That leaves us close to home with our final panelist, with your opening viewpoints, Sri. Sri Reddy, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you to everyone here and online who's watching. This is dangerous when you go last because lots of things have already been said. So I'm actually going to veer, and I'm actually going to try to bridge us from this panel to the next panel, and we're going to start with a small story. Because we all talk about retirement like it's an entitlement, that this has been around for most of human history. It hasn't. This concept has been around for about 150 years. Because until you had organized labor, until you had industrial revolution, this notion that you could have intergenerational transfer and you could actually live a life and not have to work and produce in society, but could reap the rewards, was a new concept. When this came about, life expectancy was typically in the mid-60s. And the reason employers are willing to do this is physically, most of these jobs are physically laborious. Your body starts to give out as you age, and it was actually less productive as a worker as you are older. So it was cheaper, more effective to give you a retirement allowance, tell you to go off and live your life. You typically did that for 3, 5, or 7 years, then you passed on. Now, since the 1900s, every decade we've had a single year improvement in overall mortality. Think about that. So in the last 120 years, we've improved life expectancy by almost 12 years. That's not just at birth, and that's after eradicating infant mortality, but that's starting even at ages of 65. So that's substantial. Then you add to that this notion of, hey, you have to invest in the market economics or diversified basis to keep up with inflation. That's fine, but also adds a level of volatility. And if you invest in fixed income, with the lengthening retirement period going from 5 or 7 years to now 30, 35, 40 years, there's tons of reinvestment risk. This is actually what led employers to go talk to Congress and say, we can't afford to find benefit plans. We need alternate constructs. And so the DC system was created 51 years ago. Now, why am I telling you all this? One, there are other things we can do. We talked about the pot of money for the previous 3 or 4 speakers and what policy can do. What we didn't talk about is with fewer births and more retirees and lengthening longevity, we went from 8 workers to a retiree in 1950 to 3 workers today. And that's going to drop to about 2.2 somewhere in the 2050s. Should I keep talking? Yeah, so where I was going is there's a few factors that I want to make sure you all hear and walk away with, because there's a ton of hope here too. First and foremost, human beings have a ton of resiliency, and most financial models never factor them into account, right? People just don't live their life and spend the way they're spending until they hit zero and say, what do I do now? They make adjustments along the way, which actually prevent them from ever hitting that spot. That's point one. The point two I want to make, and this is less positive, life expectancy, while it is high, it is certainly not uniform. There's 2 groups of people I want to just call attention to, especially because I'm in Iowa now. And being in Iowa, I have learned, I've traveled not to all 98 counties, but I've been to a bunch of them. Here's the truth of the matter. If you live in a rural county versus an urban or suburban county, there's a 10-year difference in life expectancy. If you're in the upper quartile of income, or the top 1% versus the bottom quartile, there's a 7 to 10 year difference in life expectancy, depending on where you live. Where Michael lives in Fairfax, Virginia, to communities in West Virginia 300 miles away, there's a 10-year difference in life expectancy. And it's because money doesn't necessarily buy happiness, it does up to a certain threshold, but it does buy life expectancy. How do we know that? We've actually done tested studies that show even in rural communities, an extra $10,000 a year of income, it boosts life expectancy by almost 2.5 years. So that's real and that's substantial. Now, why am I focusing on that? When we tell people to save and we default them and we do these things to say you need to have this much money, that's not the same situation for everyone. And when you pool them together in risk pools, often you have cross subsidies from the lowest earners, people less life expectancy, to people who are higher earners, which creates other problems too. The third thing I want to point out is increasing life expectancy is a great thing. What science has not eradicated is morbidity. So morbidity is chronic diseases that follow you into time where you're still alive, but diminish quality of life and add significantly to cost. And I'll throw one out there. As we've found more cures for cancer, as we're doing human genome therapy and treatment and so forth, you know what's been accelerating? Dementia. So there's 55 million people who have dementia in the world today. By 2050, that number will be close to 130 million people. And the people who have dementia, their life expectancies are increasing. So it's no longer 9 months of memory care. They could have a physically healthy body that keeps them going for years. And when you have fewer births, fewer workers, and more chronic conditions, how do you pay for it? How do you take care of it? So there is a whole conundrum here of how do you transfer this group of assets into the retirement income? How do you make it last in a meaningful way? But I will tell you, it is not equal. And the next panel, you're going to hear a lot of topics, and they're wonderful topics around how do you generate guaranteed retirement income. The crux that I've never been able to solve is, okay, now you know how much you're going to get. What can you buy with that? Because that will change over the next 20, 30, 40 years as well. And now you've traded one uncertainty for another uncertainty. So this is not an easy problem. It is certainly not going away. Without knowing how much time I have left, what I'll offer up is history certainly judges societies by how well they take care of their young and how well they take care of their old. So I don't think this is something that we can't solve for, but I'll offer a couple of tips that we have not talked about today. While life expectancy has increased, the number one age for Social Security claiming is still 62 in this country. More than 1/3 of Americans take it early, take a haircut, and often pay income taxes because they're still working. Bad outcome. An easy way to solve this is increasing the Social Security retirement age. That's not a favorable thing to say to try to win votes, but truth of the matter is, if you increase full retirement age to 73, a lot of the Social Security shortfalls would be solved now. If you made Social Security means testing, you'd solve a lot of those issues now. So it's certainly not an insolvent system. It's a system that's functioning well, as intended, based on the funding it was given, based on the taxes they're allowed to charge, and based on the mission that they have. So lots of interesting topics. If we have time, I want you to get to questions. But if we have time, there's another concept that's swirling around governments. I think it's worth paying attention to. That's the concept of tontines. Have folks in the room heard of tontines? So a couple of hands. So it's effectively a pool structure that says, hey, we'll put 100 people in this pool together. They'll all throw in their money together. We'll divide the check every month by 100 people. As soon as somebody passes away, we'll start dividing the pot by 99. Next person passes away, we'll divide by 98 until you get to the last living person, and you distribute the money that way. It's effective at not putting capital at risk, and it's effective at pooling risk. However, it creates other issues, including investment horizon challenges, transfer challenges, longevity challenges, and as I mentioned, the cohort of the wealthy people versus the not so economically advantaged. So Tom, with that, I'll cede my time.
Thank you, Sri.
think.
I'm looking over to Reina to see on time. Do we want to go ahead and do questions now with the in?
I think so. We can do
food?
a couple of questions from the audience. We have not received anything online anyway before this whole outage happened. I did want to say that for now we are still video streaming.
Oh, wow.
Because they have a backup Studio Iowa, who are amazing, have a backup battery.
Fabulous.
And so, but I will take this opportunity to take a couple of questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Tontines. Tontines. So that actually originated in the UK back in the 1800s. Actually, it originated hundreds of years ago.
Sure. And I'm going to plug, we do have a webinar from a couple of years ago that we did on lifetime income, and it talks about tontines. If you have a minute to go and also watch that, that was a really good discussion of other ways to do annuities other than what we currently have.
Can I just invite the interpreter to move to where Tom is in the light?
Yeah.
Tom, do you mind coming back?
No, not at all. That'd be fine.
Thank you. Yes,
T is
next
for
question.
Tom.
Sure.
It's actually our H.
Really more just input, given the conversation around solutions for retirement for maybe lower income or zero income who don't have access to this kind of thing. It feels a little bit bifurcated, lawyer, private. And I would just encourage, if you haven't already, for the policymakers in the room, have a look at, there's always a third option in terms of nonprofits. I personally worked with the Cayman Island Chamber of Commerce, which pooled assets, had all these small and larger sized businesses able to access that one trust itself to generate a retirement system that these businesses in the Cayman Islands wouldn't normally have. And it's just a trustee directed system where people run choices, and while it's not necessarily based on, your years of service, it's pretty darn close, because the longer you work, the more you contribute, you're going to get to your target, and very much, wrapped around some sort of target-based system. But it worked really well, and they were able to get, assets in there at a much lower cost, administration at a much lower cost, all through a nonprofit system, which is, in this case, the Chamber of Commerce.
And what you're talking about also was infused in Secure 1.0, the idea of the multiple employer plans, the sort of disparate employers coming together, pooling their assets to deliver common benefits. From an administration standpoint, a lot easier, fully supportive. And we have seen the rise of those aggregations since passage of Secure. And we see many of the consultants, institutional consultants like Aon and others that have started their own pools. In their cases are PEPs, pooled employer plans. But we're seeing that those are getting a lot more popular again, which is a good thing.
Ray, next question. Please use the microphone. I forgot all about
Could
that.
you go just a couple of sentences on means testing Social Security?
Yeah, so right now, anyone who pays into the system is entitled to a Social Security payment, right? It's capped at an annual amount that salary is withheld on. But when you retire, whether you make $1 million a year in passive income, you're worth $1 billion or not, you still get a Social Security check. And my point in case is, for most of these people who are getting it, it may or may not make as much of a difference. The reason as a country we still do it is Social Security is an entitlement because it's a pay-as-you-go system versus a tax. But truth of the matter is, the federal government is one big balance sheet. Whether you compartmentalize the Social Security and the federal deficit, or you pay it through then and keep on taking on incremental debt, it's 1/2 and 6 of the other. So if you need the revenue source to offset it, there are probably ways of creating thresholds to say, if you're making $50,000 a month in passive income, do you really need the government's $2,000? Don't know.
I'll take one last
Gentleman
question.
over there, if you want to go.
Yes, thank you.
I have a question about the low-income working population.
Yep.
My wife and I work largely in the aging space, and particularly the workforce that supports people who are aging. So whether you're talking about kids and child care workers, whether you're talking about people with disabilities and the people who support them, whether you're talking about the aging population, the people who need services and supports, be it in their home, be it in an assisted living facility, nursing home, whatever, these folks are working at $12, $13, $14 an hour jobs. Few have access to plans. If they do have access to plans, it's very difficult to participate in them because these people are just making it with what they've got. And I'm wondering what you do with that population other than increasing the wages so they can lead a decent life. If you're keeping their wages at that level, what kind of programs can we create that really do create meaningful retirement opportunities for them?
Can I offer you a moment of hope, and I'd love to hear from my colleagues? This is not going to make them rich, and you're not going to create a lifestyle where they're walking around the beach. But if you're in the bottom quartile of the U.S. economy in terms of wage earners, Social Security typically replaces more than 100% of what you made. Think about that statement. It's still not much. If they were struggling in their life leading up to retirement, they're going to struggle in retirement too. I can't fix that.
That's the point. If they're struggling during their lifetime, can't we create a better system that allows them to not struggle in retirement?
It's a bigger question, right? It's not just about retirement. It's the income disparity. It's the wealth disparity. It's all of the above. It's very hard to fix one thing that's going to get at what you're asking for. But if I may offer one tactical solution within the confines of retirement system, is that, if you're making $12 or $13 an hour, it's going to be very difficult. But if your employers do offer a match, if they do have access to retirement benefits like a 401k or something like that, there are match systems that does not make it contingent upon the employees to contribute, non-elective match. So there are ways that I think we have set up the system to help those people who may not have the flexibility to save. But what you're getting at is it's a societal question that goes very deep and wide. But I empathize with you and appreciate the question.
And I would just double down on Shree's point about Social Security. I think it is a very important program to provide more sustenance for lower wage workers. All the more reason to support it. There was this question around means testing. I did we had a bit of that debate when we were in government, the politics around means testing. From an economic point of view, what you said is exactly right. The politics of it are, if you means test it, the view is that it becomes more of a set-aside program or a welfare program, and you may lose some political support for it, particularly from the middle class. And so that is why that hasn't happened yet, and we'll see where the political debate goes, but that's the back and forth on it.
And the last point I will make, though, and this goes back to my story of retirement starting the Industrial Revolution, right? The jobs that we have today are much more mental in nature. And my belief is, even as you age, if your physical stamina goes down, you can still contribute meaningfully to society. So I think this notion that retirement is a phase where you stop to do nothing all at once, I think needs to evolve. I think people need to think about, how do you phase into it? Can you work part-time? How do you stay engaged and contribute to one another?
I did promise the last question to the gentleman in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for being here today. Question, there has been some countries around the world who have tried more of a privatized Social Security system, and I was just curious, in your opinion, how that's gone over, if you ever see the U.S. going to that, or maybe a semi-privatized system.
I can look, one of the views I offer up, because I think the government takes a lot of beating from lots of people, and oftentimes it's because of unawareness or a lack of awareness in the general population. Social Security, for the number of employees they have and the number of paychecks they cut, and the fact they run Medicare, is one of the most efficient organizations that's out there.
Very brief introductions to the three people who are speaking in person this afternoon. David Harris is dual moderator and speaker for us. And he is the managing director of Tor Financial Consulting, and also has been really instrumental in putting together some of the, connecting me with some of the speakers for this program. So I really, really appreciate this, David. David is a recognized international expert on global pension reforms and design. He has more than 25 years of experience in a long list of countries. I'm not going to read this, David. It's not in your bio. And then Mike Ambery is the Retirement and Savings Director at Standard Life. Mike is responsible for Thinking Forward, which provides insights, debate, and the broader platform for thought and direction across Standard Life. Finally, we have Kelly Blackwell, product lead for individual retirement solutions at Standard Life. He is a chartered financial planner and a fellow of the Personal Finance Society, and has worked in financial services for 25 years. Thank you all for all your patience and for pivoting for this panel. David?
Thank you. I'm gonna get up here. Give it an illusion. Is this microphone, which one have I got to use, mate? No microphone?
There are no microphones right now.
No, David, it's all set up to be here, to be recorded in the chairs.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Very impromptu day. I just Ladies and gentlemen, hello. How are you? My name is David Harris. I have, this is my 27th year of coming to Des Moines, Iowa. I love it very much, and very close to a good friend, Larry Zimmerman, and Principal, and Lorena and Harkin. Thank you for the privilege to speak here today, share wisdom, share insights. For my sins, I was one of the people working on Social Security privatization, so from 97 to 2000 as an alternative view on where Social Security goes. So I'm more than happy to take some questions on that and that experience. And I now reside in the United Kingdom, and Tor's been going for 21 years. I am also a pilot. I promised to get that in as a bet to a friend. And thank you, sir. And I fly planes out of Norfolk in the UK. One thing I would stress here in our presentation today, it's about Australia and New Zealand. We don't think that there's one clear, delineated answer to where things are going, but what we do think is, having been a civil servant that brought in compulsion, having been a regulator, a consultant, and also a political advisor, is that pension reform is not easy. Winston Churchill, who I won a Churchill Fellowship many years after he passed away, he said, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And I think that's the essential thesis of anything to do with Social Security pension reform. Our friend Guy Opperman, who you heard, will tell you that, like in Great Expectations, Australia or the Aussies are sharing their errors of what they've made in Social Security and pension reform with other people, and so we could live a more happy and sustainable life. So that was Guy's view or vision on Australia. How does Australia structure its pension? We are a means-tested first pillar pension. We means tested. And everybody's going to go, oh, well, yeah, but is it social insurance? Do I pay car insurance or your property and casualty? I do pay property and casualty for my car and my house, but I don't really need it because I don't have an accident, and my house generally, last time I checked, hadn't burnt down. So I don't make a call on that. But in Australia, means tested benefits on income and assets test brought in the mid-80s has seen that only 67% of Australians do get a first pillar pension, some or all, but increasingly the government back then said it was unsustainable with an aging population. The aging or the population of Australia is 26 million and is rapidly growing, and increasingly what Australians are recognising is that the retirement age must change. It's currently 67, it will go to 70 in the long term. Now, is that brutal? Is it hard? Well, it's a former convict society, you would say that, yes. But the male total average weekly earnings replacement rate, an economic measure, is only 27% when you compare a US Social Security to 43%. So that's the first point. So back in the 80s and 90s, when I joined the civil service and I was a political advisor, Australia had to do something radical, and there was women, largely women, who drove the process of change in Australia. Women trade unionists, women politicians, women more broadly in society said it is wrong that only 40% of the workforce is covered by some form of second pillar superannuation pension system like a 401k. It is wrong that there is only 40% of the workforce covered. Today, there's 94% of the workforce covered. It increased from assets alone have increased from, you guessed it, 32 billion Australian dollars, today 4.33 trillion Australian dollars. And that's quite significant. You might be saying, how does Australia continue on into the future with this system? And Mike has visited Australia last June. Australians all pay in 12% of their salaries, 12% of their salaries, employer contributions, 12%, you guessed it, I stress 12%, and the threshold is incredibly low. It's zero. If you earn $1 Australian in Australia, your employer has to put in 12% of that $1 into a retirement account. Now, it aids women especially who are rejoining the workforce in part-time work, because in the past, the threshold levels meant that they didn't contribute. Now, you might say 12%, is it a good number? Well, we argue that there probably needs to be more, and there is more in the pot. 3% on average Australians put in. So 12% on a compulsory basis and 3% on a voluntary basis. Congressman Paul Ryan then told me, David, we don't use the C word in the United States. I was chastised quite heavily. And Charlie Rangel and also Nick Smith from Michigan, Congressman, he said, we don't use the C word. And I was stunned and I said, okay, we don't use compulsion. Compulsion we don't have in the United States. But in Australia, you do. Out of that 15% I was telling you about, there is a 0.5% used for compulsory life and risk cover. But I'd leave you with this thought on the third pillar. There's a voluntary pillar, coverage for the self-employed and the self-administered. But as a former regulator in civil service, where we got it wrong is that we didn't acknowledge that this employment nexus would exist in perpetuity. It's broken down. A lot of people have more flexible working. So the Australian system is very wed to this concept of, you guessed it, going and being employed, whereas a lot more people have flexible working. If I can leave one saying to you today, ladies and gentlemen, is that Australians increasingly accept that they're more worried about living too long than dying too soon. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents were worried about that the Grim Reaper would come along and sweep away the breadwinner of the family, and poverty would be stricken into family structures. And what we're saying and seeing in Australia on a consumer basis is that Australians especially are worrying about exhausting their retirement pot. Australia's been going through change, and I've told you that change. We tax as well very differently. Nick Smith, Congressman Smith, we both share a passion for dairy farming. I was a dairy farming boy, and he told me he could milk cows, and I said, I can milk cows. We had a good chat about that. But what he said, David, it's immoral what you do to taxation of your retirement system. And I said, well, we can work on that, Congressman. Australia taxes the contribution on pensions. We tax the contribution on the income of the fund, and we used to tax the fund flow coming out, but now we exempt it. So that taxation predicates, and it's in New Zealand, a TTE system, a TTE system. We've had our problems in Australia. We've had the Royal Commission into financial services, where a Royal Commission is a very serious instrument from the, we call it the mother country or mother country of parliaments, that being the United Kingdom. And you guessed it, there was a major inquiry into financial services that brought doubt into the system. Today, banks are not involved in banking in the retirement savings structure as such. I told you the growth in Australia's system is quite staggering. It's now 4.33 trillion for a population of 26 million. It's 4.8% growing each quarter, and there's 160% of GDP. It's growing from the 40 billion, we're now at 4.33 trillion. Some smart people might be saying in the audience, I'm not going to try what Michael did, but what's it going to be like in 2043? Well, it's going to be 11 trillion. And that's quite significant. But for all the people, the actuaries out in the audience, they might be saying, well, when does the benefits cut in? When does the aging happen? And Australians put in last quarter 210 billion Australian dollars, but 132 billion was taken out. So the aging is starting to click in, those baby boomers are starting to withdraw, and that's what the system and the structure is. Australia has already been mentioned, has choice. We choose the fund you put your money into, whether it be Principal, T. Rowe, Vanguard, and you choose that as an individual, and you choose your investments. The employer is removed from that process. How many employers in Australia have their own in-house pension system? The answer is, Mike, one. One employer has bothered to now retain any form of pension structured benefit structures internally. Now, this is very different to the United States. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, Australia's view is we had to do something. 16% of the population now is over 65. By 2050, it'll be 22%. And the retirement income covenant has come into play in Australia, a legislation that forces our master trusts, our superannuation funds, to formulate better retirement savings. And this is a global trend, better retirement savings. The visuals here would have been nice to show, but what they show is that 23% of all those assets are in Australian listed securities or equities, but 29% of the pot goes international, into the United States, and also into property infrastructure. If you have had the privilege, or maybe not so privileged, view of landing in Australia at Sydney Airport, that is owned by the superannuation funds. The port of Botany to the right, when you land, is also, depending if you come in on 3-4 left, you will see that owned by the super funds as well. So superannuation is critical in the future infrastructure of the country. I'll leave it to Raina to share the slides with people. Needless to say, our tax office is the clearinghouse, and the clearinghouse is important. Okay, So the consolidation, what's happening in Australia, it's now consolidating, it's getting smaller, the number of funds, they're getting mega funds. And we have a big challenge in Australia is ESG and hydrocarbon extraction. Australia is a huge coal exporter of the materials and gas and oil, and on a per capita basis, we're the highest and we're the most polluting nation on this fair earth.
Really?
Yeah, so, sorry?
I said really?
Yeah, so on a per capita basis, I come from the port of Newcastle. Sounds lovely enough to out in Newcastle on time. 15 coal loaders go flat out, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. India, Indonesia, Japan and China can't get enough of the black gold. So the question for you to lead with my final remarks on Australia is, what is going to be the position in the United States with regard to ESG and sustainability, private markets in infrastructure and cryptocurrency, compared to where Australia is going? ESG is being replaced by terms like sustainability, better governance, and those are important considerations. I'm going to I'm just going to fly 3.5 hours across the Tasman Sea, and I'm going to go in and talk about New Zealand. New Zealand's a little bit different in terms of its individual-based accounts. It's essentially set up a system called KiwiSaver in 2007. It has what's called New Zealand Super, its first pillar. It's not means tested. It's 50% of male total average weekly earnings. It's a very generous system, and everybody in this room could qualify for the New Zealand Super System based on residency. So if we want to go and take the 23-hour flight to Auckland, stay there for about 10 to 15 years, you can qualify for New Zealand Super. But what it means though, the challenge for New Zealand is that system sustainable? It has the same tax approach, TTE, but in 2007, the late Sir Michael Cullen, lovely man, Minister of Finance, and Dr. Helen Clark created what was then called KiwiSaver. New Zealand, interestingly, does many interesting things. And it put a referendum together to the people of New Zealand. And in 1997, it asked this simple question. Well, it's a complex question, but we'll simplify it. Do you, as New Zealanders, A, want a tax cut, or do you want to compulsorily put money into a retirement account? Funnily enough, New Zealanders, 93% went the tax cut route. And for the next 20 years, it was lost, but it did come back with auto-enrollment. And Mike will talk about this shortly. What I'm saying to you about New Zealand is it only puts in 3% and 3% on a basis of 6% in total. Much too low, but very difficult to move. And what I'm saying, I fear, as a research fellow at the University of Auckland, I say to Dr. Susan St. John Rayner, who'd love to catch up with you, is that the challenge New Zealand faces really is how they take their money. How do you take the pots of money? There's no defined benefit schemes, remember, in New Zealand. There's a first pillar pension. And you might say, well, David, they'll take it in an annuity. No, in 2014 was the last time a traditional annuity product was sold in New Zealand. That was one. Today, there is no annuities. There's variable annuities. So what do New Zealand, especially women in their aged in their 70s, who've lost their spouse do? They buy a rental property that generates synthetic annuity streams, if you like. Property prices in New Zealand are exploding and there's a shortage of housing. And that's a point I'd leave you with, ladies and gentlemen, is should we allow early access of retirement savings for housing? Because there's a lot of young people all around the world who lack housing and do not see the value of pensions, and I've seen some surveys. And New Zealand allows their young people to empty their KiwiSaver products down and down and down to allow them to withdraw money from retirement savings to fund a housing deposit. So now I start to formulate the end game on New Zealand. Where does it go? Well, it goes up to 4% by 2028. It's recently come through, but the industry is very fragmented and they have a very low balance of only 111 billion New Zealand dollars. And its growth is relatively prosperous at 20%. Ladies and gentlemen, I've given you a run through of Australia and New Zealand. I've spent 30 years of my life on this. I'll probably spend another 5 years before I end and go and fly planes. But the reality is, this is a very, very difficult social problem. And sadly, a lot of politicians dodge the bullet, especially in Europe, of pay as you go. I think the sadness I have is it's the next generation who are going to have to make harder and harder decisions with regard to social security and pension reform. But if I could add anything, Australia and New Zealand are trying innovative solutions, and I'm more than happy to take questions, answers, and abuse sometimes that comes from the audience. Raina. Mike, can I, as moderator now, jump over and we talk about the UK?
Thank you, David. I'll start off with a few thank yous if I can. Firstly, to the Harkin Institute and Drake University for putting on today. Secondly, Raina, personally, thank you for all of your efforts for making this happen, and to colleague speakers that are here today. Wonderful insights in the first session, and David to start today. But the main thank you I'll give to you. You've hung around here for a topic that I'll remind you is called Roadmaps to Retirement, Global Lessons and Paths Ahead. Thank you for staying. You chose a pathway to stay here. That's either because it's dangerous out there because all the traffic lights are off, it's warmer, or you think there's going to be really good food coming at the end as well. So I want to say thank you for that, but I'd probably say my learning is off the back of global learnings. We're all facing the same problems generally. I was going to talk about the UK pensions landscape and then maybe have a few questions with my colleague Kelly here. What does the UK look like? What's the evolution of some of the answers to some of the questions and some of the problems? So we'll start off with what the UK looks like, and probably the first question that we have for the generations at the moment. We've heard globally there's a problem in adequacy and what people save for retirement. That can come from state systems, it can come from private saving, or where individuals get employer-backed savings. So in the UK, that would be pretty much private sector pensions, which are defined benefit if you work generally for public sector schemes, or defined contribution probably for everybody else. Just to give you a few stats on the back of that, there's about 18% of the UK population that's building up defined benefits still from being in local government or other public sector pension schemes. The cost of that to the UK taxpayer is around £56 billion per annum. It's projected to be 2 times the national debt for the UK for the cost of running those schemes going forward. One area. 2. Private sector, you work for any different employer, you're building up defined contribution. It's based upon, as we said before, automatic enrolment. Guy did a really good job, David did a really good job. It's on compulsion. 8% total contribution going into a pension arrangement that builds up a pot at the point of retirement. Reliance over a period of time will be state pension, private provision, and or anything else. The first question we have in the UK is it affordable? So is that defined benefit affordable? Second question, is the state pension affordable? The state pension gives everyone that retires in the UK with sufficient contributions a minimum standard of living. I'd go around the room and I'd ask, what would you view as a minimum standard of living in retirement? I'd ask Blake at the front here, he'd tell me, is that a holiday home in Hawaii or in the Caribbean? He'd probably say just a trip on the private jet every month would do. Others in the what does it mean in the UK? In the UK it means you access the public transport system. You go on maybe one vacation for one weekend per year, and you buy what I would call the economy goods within the supermarket. So that's the standard, minimum standard living is replicated by the state pension that's available to everyone. It also keeps pace with inflation by increasing each year in line with either inflation, national average earnings, or 2.5%. There's a heavy reliance on that. The then question is what's the additional contributions that can be made, and does that give a better standard of living? Should 8% follow an Australian model? Should it go to 12%? If it did, does it mean that the state pension isn't available to all and become means tested? If I go from there and say we're not going to talk about adequacy, we're going to talk about outcomes and engagement. I think, Kelly, you talked about outcomes. I think everything that you do at Vanguard is probably around how do we improve outcomes, how do we deliver more to consumers, to customers. Sri, I'm sure it's exactly the same at Principal as well. How do we deliver more? How do we deliver a better return? How do we engage either sponsor employers or individuals to actually contribute more and take some sort of responsibility with regard to that? I'll give you a question. We were lucky enough to go to a class this morning with around 20 people in it, majoring in actuarial sciences and finance. We asked them a question of who is actually saving for retirement. If I did that in the UK, I would have got a response of retirement, why am I doing that? Not that engaged. So I might get a third of the class saying, I'm interested in that. How many people here today said they are engaged and actually saving for retirement? This is a cohort of 21-year-olds. What do you reckon? Nil? You're going nil. Any advances on nil? And I can play higher or lower. I'm good at those games.
100%.
Shri, bang on the money. I did not pay him, but I will pay him later. 100% of students said they had engaged and are saving for retirement.
That was a staggering number. I'd never, in Australia equivalent, Mike, we wouldn't have seen that as well.
Yeah.
New Zealand, it was, and when we drilled down, they just said, we don't have confidence that Social Security will be there for us.
So that blew my mind. First thing I'll say back there is, this university is delivering world-class people, right? To think like that and to facilitate that, I did suggest they should get on TikTok or something and do 30 seconds to explain to other generations this is what we need to do. So first problem, adequacy. How do we solve that? How do we engage on that? Second, how do we get people to stand up and make it interactive and get engagement and follow that direction going forward? Then I'll move on to, I could go on to various different details. The third area that we have a problem at in the UK is investment. How do we stimulate investment? So all of the guys and girls who were in the class this morning, probably there to generate return through a fund that they're managing. These guys manage $1 million fund over the course of a year and see how it progresses, see how they can deliver better returns. How brilliant is that? That's what we're trying to do at scale as nations. Within the UK, how do we stimulate that? Our problem is probably different from the students' problem. They're looking for maximised return. We're looking for maximised return while stimulating domestic growth within the UK. A fact within the UK, domestic equities as part of our portfolios for investment in 1997 was 50% of investment was in UK domestic equities. In 2025, it's 4%. A fact for our government is how do we stimulate growth? To take an Australian example, stimulate growth through taxation efficiencies, incentivisation, etc., etc. So that's another byproduct that we've got to look at within the UK. Economically, how do we drive that return? But for individuals and their outcomes, how do we deliver better outcomes, deliver better investment returns? Then a final question that we had with the cohort this morning was, what are the other concerns individuals have? So you save for retirement. Is that the biggest issue that individuals have right now? A home? Could do with a home. So within the UK, and I'll talk UK stats, you can probably prefer similar to the US. Around 6-7% of people don't own their own home at the point of retirement. We predict that in 2045, that's standard life. Standard life, a little bit of background about us. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 individuals save with standard life. We're the largest pension provider within the UK. Got about maybe $500 billion US dollars by way of assets under management for us in the UK. We predict pensioner poverty will hit 50% of retirees in 20 years' time. So 50% of people that will come to retire will be in pensioner poverty. We also predict that the number of people that own their own home at the point of retirement in 2045 will go from under 10% to maybe 30-40%. That's a problem. People need to own their own home. People need to have a source of income when they come to retirement. Not going to solve those. The third and final thing that I wanted to go on to is around retirement pathways. Some of what Shri spoke about before, tontines, retirement solutions, what can individuals do? There's been a transition there of paternalism, employers sponsoring employers, the state looking after individuals when they come to retire, and then saying, you're going to get this, you're going to get an annuity, you're going to get a lifetime income that's guaranteed. That changed as we transitioned from defined benefit to defined contribution. It also changed within legislation just over 10 years ago, which said when you get to retirement, you've got a pot of money. It's up to you what you do with that pot of money. You can run out of money, you can spend it on a really fast car, which for David is a
Q7 or a Land Rover?
I was going to go for a Kia or something.
Yeah.
But yes, a high-rated Audi or something like that is probably where we look at going to. But then we've not done engagement. We've not really engaged the population during their 20s, 30s. Save more. Think about where it's invested. Engage on what you can do with saving. Then building to a point of how you're going to retire. Back to what sort of standard of living do you want in retirement? And then how do you make a choice on the range of different products that are available at the point of retirement? So we expect people to get a sort of major in pensions at the point of retirement and make a choice of what they want to do. And that could be a one-off decision. So what we're doing at Standard Life and what we're doing within trying to paint a picture of what the future looks like, trying to use data. We're going to try and use AI. We're going to try and do guidance to say to individuals, you've got a pot at the point of retirement, and a bit like Amazon, when you go buy your shopping, I don't know, you bought some milk. Somebody like you buying milk might also buy bread. Somebody with a pot of money like you might choose to take some cash, take some drawdown, save it for a later date and to protect it. So that's what we're trying to do in the UK. It's something called targeted support, where we're suggesting to individuals, these are the pathways of choice and these are the products that could help you make those decisions going forward. So I'll leave you as, globally, I think we have the same issues: adequacy, engagement, choice. What I think we're trying to do as an industry, with learned colleagues, with people here today, we're trying to educate people, we're trying to deliver better outcomes, and we're trying to deliver better solutions. Really happy to take any questions. UK, Australia. I don't want abuse because David took that as a corner earlier.
Yeah.
And thank you for persevering with the roadmap and staying with us today. So, thank you.
I was going to pose a lot of questions to these guys, but I think in the circumstances, I'd like to open it to the floor and pillory it with lots of questions the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah. About
Questions from the floor.
15 minutes. So that we can close on time. But
Yeah.
I agree. Also, we are recording with the phone here, so if you just would speak up, we are not using any of the microphones that we had for questions. Just raise your hand and let us know, and we'll direct where.
Questions from the floor. I'm looking. Like you're dying to ask the question.
Well, you could share more what you do in retirement.
Well, obviously I'm very akin to the engagement. I mean, can you speak more to that in terms of I mean, we've talked about this as well in terms of the innovation in products to help with retirement income for life, annuities, things like that. How much, the intersection of engagement and education, you have these great products to help solve the problem, but if you don't get people to use them, then they are of no value. So you described some things. Can you go a little bit more in depth into that engagement, education, and the overlap of those?
Yeah, I guess this targeted support, and there's a framework of advice in the UK. So taking financial advice is a regulated activity, but only 1 in 10 people take advice. So you may have a load of products that advisors are recommending, and the other customers, 90% of people don't know how to use them. So there's a new framework being put in by the regulator in the UK. So you'll have guidance as your sort of basic level, targeted support, simplified advice, and then full advice. Targeted support is a big one, which I think the rules are looking at this being introduced in 27, and this will allow us to help build that education for customers and nudge them down that particular path. So when we were talking earlier on this week, for customers who, for example, aren't saving enough for retirement, we would know or estimate this is how much you're going to have by the end of it. So what sort of annuity or income that would actually buy you, the customer's not really going to engage in that. But we can then, under targeted support, we could say to them, actually, this is only going to give you a certain level of living. If you decided to add another £50 a month into your pension, this could make this much difference. It'll be a regulated activity to do that. It's not compulsory for all pension providers to do it, but it will make a massive difference, I think, to helping people. Because, I mean, the pension providers kind of know, this would be a sensible thing for you to do, this would be a sensible thing for you to do, but we can't say that to them at the moment because it's then classified as giving them financial advice. It might not be the best thing for them. There may be other things. I think coupled together with that, what if somebody can't afford that extra £50 a month because they're 30 years old and they've got kids and mortgages and loans and that sort of stuff. So I think there's a position for education in money management and debt management, many things that Blake looks at, but something combining those sorts of things together. You could make a suggestion to a customer, this is something that you would really benefit over the longer term, and can you then extend that framework to, oh, well, actually, I can't afford that, but how do we help that person then manage other parts of their finances to enable them to do that going forward? So,
very quickly, the targeted support and those other levels you were talking about, those are being defined by the regulators, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Further questions? Ma'am, please.
So getting back to some of the outcomes, how to distribute the money or plan it at the beginning of retirement, at the end of savings. Here in the US, we're finding that most people are not anticipating the cost of medical care in retirement. I take it that's probably not as much of a concern in the UK and Australia, but what about not only medical care, but long-term care?
Sure.
At a certain point where you cannot care for yourself and you need assistance.
Yeah, so it is absolutely a concern within the UK in terms of long-term care. Whereas health service is free at the point of access within the UK, and whether you think it's good or bad is a wholly different question, but you can get healthcare throughout your life for free as a UK citizen. So I would take that as an aside. You're absolutely accurate, so it doesn't represent itself in the UK. In terms of caring and caring responsibility, you're absolutely spot on. And this is how to view what's your income flow needed in retirement and why it's difficult to always predict it, and to educate individuals of where and what they may consider their lifestyle to be. So when you start retirement in the UK, you have an opportunity of having a quarter of whatever you've built up tax-free. You can take it, do what you want with it without paying any tax. over 70% of people in the UK take that option. Whether they actually utilise all of that cash to do something is under debate. Quite a lot just take the money and reinvest it somewhere, probably in cash, so it's given a poorer level of return than what they require over their lifetime. They may go and do what I'd call the active years splurge. So go on holidays, go and do stuff that they wanted to do all of their working life. They've maybe taken a break. They don't go into flexible retirement, which was part of what Sri was saying there. You go into full-on retirement rather than sort of one day a week, not being in, 2 days, 3 days, sort of thing. The next point that I'd say is it then plateaus in terms of spending within the UK. People then start to get a normalised life in retirement, have a sort of regular flow of what they do during a sort of mid-phase of retirement. And then in the latter phase, it then becomes less active. So people don't travel. For whatever reason, they can't get travel insurance, they don't want to go, they don't feel active anymore to be able to go. There's also a cognitive decline that kicks in into late 80s, 90s, why people don't feel comfortable medically to go. At that same point, there's an uplift to care. Absolutely what you say. Where can people live, and is that afforded by the state? There is a minimum standard that's afforded by the state. You can be in something that we call in the UK a welfare home or a care home that's provided by the local authority, the local state, which then provides you with a minimum standard of care. For the majority of people, they don't want that minimum standard of care. They want to live in their own home, they want nursing at home, they want private care that gives a different facilitation. So you need to have a different, so whilst you have a flow of money there, you have a dip of money there, and you have a later flow of money to meet needs at that later point. That's really difficult to be able to design solutions based upon retirement pots that say, you're going to want that. And how do we deliver that when you're making poor decisions and poor points?
So we have in Australia 3 segments for retirees. The go-go generation or period from 65 to maybe 75, the slow-go period 75 to early 80s, and then the no-go period where it moves into long-term care. We have a strong ability in Australia for individuals not to spend their retirement savings. There is a study being done at the University of Brisbane where Brisbane Cemetery has more wealth in this one cemetery where people, looking at records, retired with a certain amount of wealth and they passed away with largely the same wealth. So in other words, they were conservative in their spending. And one of the reasons why, as I said, was they were worried about living too long, and that was a concern. But our long-term care is a challenge. I had it with my late mother with dementia, and she raised a very good point. Dementia is racking the world and with lots of misery. But the issue with her was she had a choice. She had to lodge a bond, a government-registered bond of, say, $250,000 with the government to secure her a place in a decent care home. When she died, that bond came back to the estate. But what it means in Australia is the family home really does need to be sold to afford long-term care. And that's a very emotive consideration. Certainly in the UK, there is that consideration. And the final point I'd share with you is inheritance tax or death taxes. Australia doesn't have them. So if you pass away, there's no tax burden being placed on the next generation. And that was a significant change. But it does shape the outcomes. 1 or 2 last questions from the floor. So,
just to piggyback on your point about, if I understood it correctly, you really need to have a home to afford long-term care. How about those people that don't have the home?
Like Mike, means tested benefit. Means testing would cut in if they had a level of income or assets that was below a threshold. The state would intervene and provide for care in a home, a care facility, call it what you will, It's a care facility that is not state of the art. It provides basic standards of care. But it's the state, as in the federal government, not the local authority, that intercedes and pays for those care costs of the individual.
So an analogy could be, for example, in the United States, where we have folks who cannot afford
Correct.
their own long-term care, they go on the Medicaid program.
Correct. The Medicaid program.
Medicaid is paying, but they are typically in a poorer facility.
Correct.
Not well staffed.
No.
Not providing high quality care. So you just get into that stratification of
Correct.
quality.
Correct. And there's nothing worse than taking a mother around to care facilities that she doesn't like, but she just wants something decent and she wants to be cared for, and you know, she deserves those respects. So intergenerationally, people like myself click in and support that care process, and that's what's happening increasingly. That the largest bulk number of around the world in developed nations who are providing low cost, if no cost care costs, is women. Women are caring for not only their parents, but the parents of their spouse. And that is either low cost or no cost care. And the numbers are pretty frightening. One further question. Lucky last.
You have space for one more? Okay.
Just quick. I mean, Blake, you get
So when you said Australia cut the inheritance tax completely, how did that flow through? What were the changes?
Yeah. Well, we cut it on. We're a state. We're 6 states, 2 territories. Just quickly, Rena. Quick. Queensland was the first to go, and there was quite a charismatic premier, and he basically said, "In my state, we will not charge inheritance tax." So what meant it used to be that it sounds terrible. The death flights, people quite sick would get on flights in Sydney and Melbourne and fly to Brisbane and pass away, so they wouldn't pay inheritance tax. So you would have pilots who are diverting aircraft into Sydney because in Melbourne that person was very sick when they got on flights.
But how did it impact savings?
So what it meant is there was essentially the inheritance tax planning went, policies went. You don't have whole of life, traditional life annuity products, they all went, and it became much more transparent, and intergenerationally there was a big benefit for baby boomers. I have to close. It's been a delight and an honor. Thank you. And thank you, Benoit.